Okay, at this point in the modeling process, we kind of need to make a decision on how it is we want to create the material for this object. In this case, I would want to use image maps because I think it would be best to actually use a paint program to go in rather than using procedurals because we could add veins that way and add a number of things that would just either take too long in the modeling process or really aren't necessary, and they could easily be created with bump maps. But the difficult thing is deciding exactly where you want certain things, because we know that if we actually look at a heart, the coloration on the tubing is going to be different than this part right here, and then also this will be a different color than these extra little muscles that come down, the extra part of the muscles that comes down over here, since the whole thing is actually a muscle. And so you want to keep in mind whether you want procedurals or image maps. And I really think image mapping is the best for pretty much any model for the most part, especially something like this. But you have to decide when you want to start making your UV maps. Because at this point, we're still pretty low res. We might not, if we have good enough image maps, we won't even have to metaform this anymore to add more detail. Although I do want to do that. At this point, we can decide and start making our UV map. Because once we go beyond this level of detail, it's going to become a lot harder to create that UV map later because we're going to have so many polygons. It's just going to be a very jumbled mess and extremely hard to create a UV map for that. So what we want to do is actually start taking each piece of our model and breaking up and creating UV maps for it. And there's another good thing about keeping these separate and not putting them on the same layer. Well, not even so much on the same layer, but just keeping the model separate by itself. It'll make our UV maps much easier to create. Another thing too is we can also start deleting polygons that don't necessarily need to be there if we wanted to. Let's take a look at these polygons right here. We can see that we don't even see a lot of these. Those polygons right there, well, that one you do kind of see. But if we did bring that in, you would no longer see it anymore. So you want to start weeding out some of the polygons you know you're not going to need. So if you want to start bringing edges down, and in this case we could probably go through, and if we tweak it just enough, we might even be able to delete most of those polygons right there. And the same thing on our main model, if we go ahead and reverse that and take a look at some of these polygons. But that's something you really want to look at in a more high-res object. Maybe if we after we metaform it, we'll go in and delete some. But technically, we really don't need to right now, just because it's only a few polygons overall in the whole model. We might delete maybe 10 or 12, which isn't really going to make that huge of a difference with this sort of model. If you'd had something more complex and it was a matter of deleting hundreds of polygons by going through and doing pieces like that, then I would definitely suggest doing it, unless of course that made it more difficult for your UV map. So the first part we actually want to do is we're just going to go through quick UV mapping here, and I'm just going to grab one of the smaller pieces, which is going to be easier to work with. And there's many different techniques for UV mapping. There are several plugins available that you could use. We're just going to use Lightwave's native features, but even within there, there's different ways of kind of taking on that UV process, and it can become a little difficult for some of these organic models. This is going to take a long time to make UV maps for this. There is no quick and easy way for it. Just because we have all these tubes kind of going around each other, and the fact that we even have extensions alone and extrusions coming out of the model is going to make it that much more difficult because there's certain things we have to break up when we're working on that texture map that we wouldn't normally have to do if you didn't have this kind of a model. But organic UVs are a little more difficult than just standard, especially when you have like a complex object like this, which is very low polygon, but it's still considered pretty much complex just because we have all these objects coming here, and are at least complex in the UV terms. So we're going to go to our last layer here, and we're going to take a look at actually UV mapping this piece. And like I said before, we want to do it now before we add any more geometry because it's going to make it much easier if we already have that UV map laid out, once we metaform it, the map will stay pretty much the same. And that way we don't have a lot or 4 times as many polygons to work with. So we're going to start out by going down here to the T, which is our texture map tab in the lower right part of the screen. And we're going to go to New. And I'm going to call this part 003 because this is the third part on the third layer. And now we have our different types of mapping options. We have planar, cylindrical, spherical, and atlas. And we're just going to go through right now and I'll show you exactly what each one does, just using the default values. We'll start the planar, and this is just going to use a flat part of the object. And if we're going to do that, we're going to do it on the Z, and then just leave it on automatic and click OK. Now, in order to pull up our UV map, we go to Perspective up here and change that to UV Texture. And I also want to go ahead and activate our grid for this. So D on the keyboard, go to Viewports, top right, and check on Grid. And now we can see, because what we've actually done is only taken one side, and although both sides are on here, it's really only showing one side. It's not unwrapped at all. And this is going to be extremely hard to work with for something like this, because we don't have that all-around value, and it'll be very difficult to work on both sides of the tubes. And since this is an entirely asymmetrical object, that is going to be very difficult. So for something like this, we do not want to be using the planar setting. So we're going to go ahead and undo that, Control Z, go to New, and we're going to try something else now. And I could just leave this on the default texture since we're not actually using these. And we're going to go to cylindrical. And if we do cylindrical, what it's going to do is pretty much go through the center of the object and kind of wrap it around, or unwrap it, going around on a certain axis. And for this, since it's mostly on the y-axis, especially since we have the tube kind of going through here, we want to unwrap it on the y. And we can use the automatic values again and click OK. And now that is still a little bit better, but we still have this major jumble in here of everything. And once we start getting there to edit the points, it's going to become a little bit too much. So we want to undo that, and that's definitely not their piece for this. We could also do spherical and click OK. And spherical gives you a different type of option, but we still kind of get this real jumbled look. And this could take forever to, well, unwrap and sort of move all these points into the right positions. But there is a much easier way. And since we're going to pretty much have to disassemble this polygon by polygon anyway, we might as well just use the Atlas mode. So undo that, we'll go to File, New, and we're going to change this to Atlas. And now the subpatch interpolation we can actually change later, so we'll just leave it on linear right now, which is going to show us pretty much just our polygons. If we change this to subpatch, then it would show our subpatch polygons within the UV map. But I'll show you that in a little bit, how you can change that. That's actually pretty easy. We don't have to worry about any of these other settings either, because we don't have it by part, and we don't really have surfaces set up. And since they're on separate layers, it doesn't really matter anyway. So we're just going to call this then part underscore 003, oops, and click OK. And now what this did was broke up our model. Although it's in several pieces and scattered out a bit, at least our polygons are mostly straight. And you could edit it this way after you go in and to clean up the points in here. For instance, we'll use the drag tool and start coming in here and cleaning up points. And you notice we kind of have holes in certain places, and we do want to clean these up for the most part. And just coming around and doing that in certain parts of the model. And now you could technically, if you wanted a quick and easy way, you could use just this Atlas mode where it's at and actually keep that texture the way it is for mapping it, and just keep this whole map once we get everything kind of straightened out. But I wouldn't suggest doing that. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to work on a small piece of this just to kind of show you how you want to work with your other UV maps. I don't want to spend too much time on it because it can take a very long time for this process. But just we're going to take a look at how we would work with this atlas right here, this atlas map, and kind of start bringing our polygons together. And pretty much, since it broke it up into different parts, what we want to do is piece it back together. And in order to do that, we're going to have to take a look at certain aspects. For instance, let's take a look at our polygons here. We're going to select our polygons in our UV map, which is going to show up on our actual model. And we can see that this strip of polygons right here runs down the side. And if we take a look at our next strip of polygons here, we'll see that it runs down right next to it, but it is reversed. So pretty much this UV map, this entire UV map is pretty much backwards. So we are going to be working backwards with it, but that's fine because when it comes to UV mapping, you're pretty much doing both sides of the polygon. And if you're actually painting it or going into a paint program and or even a 3D paint program and doing that, that's not going to make that big of a difference. So one thing we want to take a look at is now we have our two sets of polygons, and they're not joined up, but we can join them up. If we select our points, we'll notice that if we select these 2 points down here, it still shows up as 2. We'll go ahead and take a look, and actually what we need to do is reverse this set of polygons and bring these points over to here, and these points will need to be where this is. And we could just flip those around, but we're going to go in and manually drag them. And one thing I want to show you, the main way to find out if the points belong to each other, like I know that this point belongs right here with this point, and they need to be welded together, but not just yet. The easiest way to tell is to select those points, and we'll go down here under select, and even though we see 2 are selected, since all of our polygon or points are still welded within the actual model, they're showing up in the UV map as separate, they are still 1 point. So this is 1 point, so we know that those are joined together. If we grab those 2, it'll show up as 2 points because those are separate points. Another thing is you'll actually see that 1 point selected and nothing else in that view. So we know that these points are joined up right there. So what I'm going to do now is Control T, drag tool, and I'm actually going to go ahead now and actually just expand this full view just so it's easier to work with. And we're just going to go ahead and start dragging these points off to the side and just swapping them. And you'll notice too that this lines up pretty well because they are the polygons that are right next to each other. And we'll clean that up a little more too, but if we take a look now we have our points right next to each other. And we want to go ahead and start putting them close to each other. Now we can't exactly put them and weld them because this is still 1 point. If you go to Control W, it says needs to directly select 2 or more points. Well, we're only selecting 1 because that's still technically welded together. And until we unweld everything, which we're actually going to have to unweld all of the points in order to weld these together in our UV map. And so if we can do that, we just want to have some placeholders. So we're just going to line them up close to each other so that we know they're there, but we don't want to overlap because otherwise we may think that they are merged already together or already welded together. So we just want to make sure we're doing this, keeping them close together but not actually on top of each other because we are going to be welding them later. But we just want them to know where everything's worked out, and this will be easier to work with our model while we're doing this. And I'm just going to go ahead and straighten this out a bit. And we can make these polygons all pretty much the same size for the most part. And come onto the side over here and just edit this, which is going to make for a much cleaner UV map. Because if we have different sizes and it's all jumbled up, our images are going to get skewed once we map the image to this model or to this UV map. So that's looking pretty good so far. We've got that pieced together. And we just have to go through and pretty much piece it together. And it's not going to fit together perfectly. And a main thing for that is actually the inside of the tubes. Because when we have the inside of the tubes, they're actually, it should be these ones right here. We can see that's the inside. Well, that can't be directly connected to this because you still have to unwrap it. It can't be 3D. We're flattening it out. In other words, we're pretty much cutting it down and taking slices through the center or the side of it and then flattening it and kind of pushing down on it to flatten it out. So we are going to have seams on the edges and one line going through. And if you go in your paint program, you'll actually notice you'll be editing one polygon. Let's say we're editing this one. Let's just say these two are joined on this side. Well, if we're working on this polygon, we'll have to jump over and work on the other one. And it can be a little difficult to get it matched up, but it's pretty much the only way. So you want to keep your seams, if you can, if you have the most control, we would want to keep our seams for this model on the back side of this object. So actually in the inside right here, we want to cut it along. And actually sometimes too, it is possible to create a morph map. There are different ways of doing it where we could actually do it with the actual model and unwrap it that way. And then create our UV map in a planar fashion. So there's also that method too. If we're just gonna take a look at this right now, this method really quick, because there's lots of things you can do with this method. Although like I said, there are different ways or sometimes easier ways, but it really depends on the model. And we're just trying to figure out now where other points are. Like, let's grab this polygon over here, and we need to find out if it's connected to anything nearby. And we can see that it's actually connected to this one over here. So we can grab this polygon, T, and just move that down. And we know that this polygon needs to be joined up pretty much to this one, but we still want to verify those points and make sure. Let's go to point mode, and as we can see, those are separate. But if we take the other side, so it just needs to be reversed. You can see that as one point when we grab our other side here. So we'll just go ahead and line that up. So now if we take a look at these 2 points, we can see that's 1. Take those 2, and it's 1. And basically what you want to do is just make this so it's kind of losing its shape. So we have nice square polygons. And we can just pull it down and start finding the other pieces. And sometimes you want to select directly on the model to find that piece. So right now, we know that we need that center piece right there. And another thing you might want to do is actually change one of these views to our perspective view. So we'll go from right to perspective and change that to texture. And we can see, or actually we'll go ahead and change it to wireframe shade, that way we can see everything. We need to know that we need to find that. So we click on it, and we look for it in our model, and we can see that it's over here. So we're going to deselect all of this, and actually we'll go in and even see if those are joined up. And it looks like those are actually connected right there. We can see that is 1 point, so we know that those need to go together. So we're going to go in here, deselect these polygons, and select all of these, hit T to move, and just move them over. And we want to find out exactly what fits where. So I'm going to test some of these points. And we can see that those fit in there. So pretty much this polygon will fit in there, but we want to know if these points are joining up correctly with this, and they are. So pretty much it's kind of like putting a puzzle together with this method. And like I said, there's other ways of doing this, and I'll show you that in a sec. Just one of the other methods that you can do. And we're just going to grab these in here. And we just want to line this all up so it looks nice and clean. We are outside of the grid right now, but that's okay because we'll just move it back once we get this sort of finished. And now we're going to verify these points, go into point mode. And we can see that that is actually wrong. Or wait, actually, no, that's correct. And that's correct. If we deselect that, that's correct. So actually all of these also need to be welded together. And now we're missing this polygon in here. So we can go in here and select those. And we can see that it's this middle one and the side one that we're missing. So we'll grab those and find out where those are at. And those are up here. So we deselect all of our polygons. And we'll go ahead and bring these down. And now we need to find out exactly where. these polygons go. So we'll grab this one, and we're just going to grab some random points to kind of find out uh, if they match up with any of these. And that's probably the easiest way. And no, it doesn't look like those ones do. So let's go back and find out which polygon we're looking for. Okay, so let's check the points on this one. And you just want to go through, deselect, and we know that that point actually joins up with that one. So we'll select this polygons, Y to rotate, go in here, and we might actually need to flip that because if this point matches up with this one, which it doesn't, actually matches up with that one. So what we can do is actually go in here and piece that. And we're just kind of unwrapping it in some pieces here. And you notice that all three of these join up as one point, so we know those go together. And that one and that one. And those two do not go together. So join that up and that up. And you're pretty much just going through, like I said, and checking and see what's what and what goes where. We know that this is joined up with that. And this does not appear to be joined up with some of these other pieces. So we want to find out where these polygons are. And they're actually on separate parts of the model. And that's why they don't join up. But they do join up over here. Once we work our way down, see that that's actually coming off the side over there. So this should be down here, kind of coming off. But these do need to be connected. So you want to go through the whole model there and just figure out where things go, join them up, and sample them. And like I said too, for the inside stuff you want to connect it, but we need to leave it open, and you can't connect all the points. So let's say we needed to create a circle out of this and join up this point to this point. Well, we can't, because then we'll have overlapping polygons within the UV map. So you need to leave some things alone, which will create a seam in your model. But that's okay. So now what we want to do is unweld all of our points so we can join these up together. And we're just going to join up this small area right here. So we need to unweld all points. So we're going to hit Detail tab, and we can do Unweld. And if nothing is selected, everything is selected. So we're just going to select Unweld, which will automatically unweld our model. And if we take a look at the perspective view, we'll see that none of our polygons are joined together. But this allows us now to weld together the points in the UV map. So we'll just do Control W and weld those together. And weld those together. And since those are now welded, we can overlap them. And it's not necessarily joining them together. So you might have to go in and actually place that a little bit better. But we can go out and go through and do that to every single piece in here. And then if we want to, we can weld all of our points back together, which we could use by hitting M on the keyboard for merge. And that will merge everything back together. And we end up with the same piece of the model. Now, like I said, this is kind of a crude method, and it might not be the best way. One way I really like to do it, as one of the major ways, is actually to go in and edit the model itself and break the model down. So I'm going to show you that now. So we don't need this part 3 anymore, and we can just go to none, because we don't even need to have that showing. And we're going to change this back to the right view, and actually our images in the background are no longer there, but technically we don't need them anymore. So hit D on the keyboard, go to backdrop, and just clear out all of those images. Another thing I want to mention too is the fact that those images, once you close Lightwave and you open it back up, those images won't be there anymore, or they might be there and they won't be quite right. See, the major thing is when you save a model, it doesn't save your background images. So sometimes you might want to just keep Lightwave open and minimize it if you can. Otherwise, you every single time you want to open up Lightwave and edit that model, you are going to have to load those images back in and set them back up. So that's one drawback. Maybe the newest version of Lightwave will have something a little bit better than that that will actually save our background images with it. But since it's not technically part of the model and it's part of the layout interface, that doesn't look like that's going to be happening.